Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event. This event is brought to you by DataTalks.Club, which is a community of people who love data. We have weekly events, and this event is one of such events. So if you want to find out about the events we have, there is a link in the description. You can just go there and click on this link. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, now it's the best time to do this. So you just can go under this video and click on this link. You will not regret because you will get our videos in your feed. And then finally, if you haven't joined our amazing Slack community, you should also do this as well, because there you will talk about different data-related topics. During today's interview, you can ask any question you want. There is a link in the live chat. Just click on this link, ask your question, and I will be covering these questions during the interview. So this week we will talk about a data product manager. And we have a special guest today, Sara. Sara is a product manager at Menefee, a company building a data platform that helps software teams orchestrate and integrate data into their data-driven applications. In her previous life, previously, Sara worked as a product designer for companies including Sara, Checker, Change.org, and Zendesk. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you.
Before we go into our main topic of becoming a data product manager, let's start with your background. Can you tell us about your career journey so far?
Yeah. Where do I even begin? So I guess I can start with, I've made a lot of transitions in my career, but one thing I've always known is that I wanted to work in technology. And for me, the entry point was actually a technical support role at a large shared hosting company. After a handful of years in that role, I felt pretty stuck. That company was based in Utah. While there is quite a bit of opportunity there in technology, there wasn't as much as I had hoped for. There wasn't a variety of companies that I could say, hey, I can work for this company and learn something new. So a good friend at the company that I was working with actually convinced me to move to San Francisco and said, hey, if you want opportunity, San Francisco is the place to be. I'm moving out there. He had just received an offer to work at a cloud computing company, and he's like, come out with me and we'll figure it out together. So I did the unthinkable, and it was literally a decision that I made within 2 weeks. I packed up all my stuff, and we literally drove out in the middle of a winter storm and moved to San Francisco. When I arrived in San Francisco, I didn't have anything lined up, but I was comfortable with that. Through generosity of just friends and connections, I was able to pick up a few technical gigs here and there. And eventually, I'm going to fast forward. I eventually landed a product support role at a company called Zendesk. And that's where my career actually made the biggest shift. So at the time, I had already been working with a lot of companies that use Zendesk for their help desk and helping them, curate their help desk experiences so they could help their customers. And so I was working a lot around helping them design experiences that could then ultimately result in customers know where to go in order to get this information, and help them brand that experience and make it, a bit more familiar. I ended up reaching out to the chief creative officer at the time, and I was actually trying to refer a friend for a design position, but I had mentioned to him that I had a passion for design and technology, and I showed him just a few of the projects that I had worked on. And fast forward, I was suddenly in a room interviewing for a product design role, and I got it, which was a huge opportunity and I feel so lucky. And from there, my career grew. I went on to work for a B2C company called Change.org. So they are one of the world's largest online petition platforms. I then went to work for a company called Checker, which is a background check API company. And then I worked for a couple early stage companies. So Sara, which is an HR data platform. And then I arrived here at Menefee.
Yeah, that's quite a journey. Yeah. So what did, like as a designer, what kind of things? So when I hear designer, I imagine somebody who is designing furniture or how your apartment should look like. Is it? I imagine that it's a different kind of designer, right? So what kind of things you needed to take care of, like how elements are arranged on a website, things like this.
Yeah. So I love, interior design and all of that. But the type of product or the type of design I was doing was product design. And so a lot of that was taking product requirements and building user experiences through interface design. So that involves quite a bit of user research, user testing, figuring out how customers, expected to interact with our technology, the outcomes they were expecting, and, iterating a billion times, trying to figure out what was it that, helped our customers along. Um, yeah.
So do you have to be good at design? Like, do you have to have a good taste to be a product designer?
I think you have to have like a foundational understanding of technology. You need to really care about customers, about the people that you're serving. I feel like the more visual aspects that come in that play a part in product design, all of that can be learned. Depending on the size of the company, you can usually get away with like using an existing design system or component library. So you don't have to worry too much about like, oh, well, what color should this button be? Or what kind of, display should I use for this? And so I would say like, yes, you should have an eye for design, but it really comes down to the best designers I've always known are the ones that, you know, are their interests are deeply rooted in solving problems for their customers.
Hmm. Yeah, and what do you do now as a data product manager?
That's a great question. I work actually pretty similarly to how a regular product manager would work. I guess the only difference here is I'm working on data products and not just feature products or what people traditionally think of as feature products. So I do a lot of similar work around like spending time understanding customers. For me as a PM working on data products, that means talking with and interacting with data professionals any chance I get. And the goal behind that is to understand things like what are the core responsibilities? What are the problems that you're aiming to solve? What challenges do you run up against? How do you get around them? And for a lot of my conversations, like they often go towards more tactical aspects of how they take requirements from all over the business and turn it into actionable data. And when I say actionable data, I mean like data that's driving their applications or infrastructure, or in some cases used in data analysis. And from there, like I take a lot of my learnings from those conversations or any other information I might have and start developing an understanding of the problem that we're trying to solve in data and how we might do that and help them accomplish that. And the thing I found specifically with like data teams is that not everything I learn necessarily points to an obvious answer. I find that, depending on the type of company, the type of, requirements, that they lay in front of their data team really determines how that team operates and like what the organizational motions are for that team. Like, are they, just building pipelines for data analysis or are they, powering their applications with real-time data and why? Like, why is that? So from there, like I basically take all that information. Occasionally I will, reach for some of the tools that they're using to kind of figure out like, okay, what's not working here? What are some of the pitfalls of some of the technologies and tooling that they're using? And from there, like I take all those findings, I, present it to the internal stakeholders and partners that I have within our company. And we align on whether or not this is the right problem to be solved or if there's something more that we discovered. So basically it's just like understanding, data teams and how they operate, and then formulating a hypothesis on like the problems that they're experiencing, and then, further ideating on a couple of solutions on how we think we can help them, or formulating like new approaches.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I know nothing about product designers, but what you described, your responsibilities as a product designer previously, that you would also do a lot of user research that would involve talking to users and then understanding their problems and then thinking how you can actually solve these problems, right? Uh, or maybe I misunderstood you, but it seemed like there are some similarities between what you're doing now and what you were doing previously as a product designer. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So oftentimes, product designers and product managers work in close collaboration during this phase. This, I guess you can call it product discovery phase, where, we're really getting in the weeds with some of our customers or potentially prospective customers to understand like what is it that, they're trying to do? What is the problem? And just like validate some of our assumptions around the solution that, we will eventually embark on.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. This product discovery phase. What are the other phases there?
So following product discovery is really just about, it's not just the, the customer development piece. There's also like market research, like researching the tooling, as I had said before. Sometimes it's a little bit of like data analysis if we have data at our disposal to kind of formulate an understanding of the problem. And when you say like, what's the rest of the process, do you mean like as a product designer or like as a product manager?
Well, I guess, like you said, product discovery phase, I thought, okay, that's just maybe phase number one. There could be other phases. I assume there is some sort of process. So first you do product discovery and then you do probably some other things. So I was thinking,
Yeah.
what are the?
So then we go into the process of like planning with the team. So a lot of that, I kind of covered where we present our findings to stakeholders and partners. We kind of align on whether or not the problem we're trying to solve is the right problem. And from there, like if the team is aligned and everything's a go, we go into the process of working cross-functionally with like engineering teams as well as designers, as if the product solution happens to have an interface. And we really just go through a process of like ideation. So like a lot of like rough prototypes, like, here's this, specific goal that we're looking to meet. Like, how can we accomplish XYZ? How can we accomplish a specific experience that we're targeting? And from there, we go through a couple reps of like, okay, how confident are we in the solution? Okay, how do we, and before, and before that point, like we kind of like figure out, okay, well, how are we going to measure the success of this? So we generally have success metrics in place to kind of like articulate, okay, what is it, that we're trying to accomplish here? How do we measure that against? Sometimes it's like an actual metric, like, oh, we want to see XYZ happen. Or sometimes it's like the customer should be able to do this and they should be able to do it effectively. And from there, we go through the process of, engineering. It's like, okay, we're going to build this thing. We go through a few reps of demoing along the way, depending on the dependencies that are needed for the specific feature. Development can take anywhere from like, a few weeks to a month. And from there, like, I go through the process of product manager of just like, if we run into any potential like gotchas where we then have to reevaluate how we're implementing the solution, and coordinating with the team to make sure we can get through those phases. Then it's the product launch process where we work cross-functionally with the go-to-market teams. That's product marketing, potentially other product stakeholders, design, etc. And we kind of generate all the things that we need to do in order to get the product to market. And then we go through the release process. So yeah, that's kind of like
Interesting.
a
So
short description.
product discovery phase, then planning phase, then ideating, and then starting to think how you are going to implement this thing, then setting up KPIs, then actually delivering the thing with the engineering team, and then thinking of launching after this thing is engineered, created, and then actually releasing. Right? Did I get it right? And
Yep.
you as a product manager, you need to think about all these phases, all these steps of the process,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And as a designer, previously you were mostly involved in the product discovery phase or also other phases as well?
Mostly the product discovery and then the execution phase
Mm-hmm.
where we're ideating and developing solutions.
Mm-hmm. I heard about this thing called design thinking. Is it in the ideation phase, right? Like when you think, okay, here's the problem, and then you think how you can solve it. And
Yep.
you as a product manager also need to know this kind of things and use them, or?
I mean, it really depends on the product manager. Some rely on the partnership with the product designer to like guide through that process. Some actually have a really, keen sensibility for it. And so I think it really depends on, what the background and expertise of the product manager is. But it's generally not the expectation. I mean, they should have an understanding of whether or not the experience actually delivers on the, goals that they've set, or the requirements that they've set, but it's not always a requirement.
But from what I understood, having experience in product design is definitely helpful for transitioning into product management role, right? So
Yes.
because there is some overlap, like especially this product discovery phase and other things. Okay. And how did you become interested in product management?
I mean, I've always been super fascinated with how companies work and more importantly, how they go about building products. So I've always preferred to work in super close partnership with product managers as a designer. And I always found that I was never satisfied just fulfilling my own part. So in particular, I was super interested in working cross-functionally alongside our engineering teams, understanding the systems behind driving whatever we were designing and building, as well as the process of, measuring success of a feature product. Like it wasn't just enough that we launched something. It was like, okay, well, how successful was this product release? Like, are customers able to get what they need to do done? Are they able to, achieve like whatever the product is meant for them to do? And then if not, like what are some areas of measurement that we can start, ideating on? Like, oh, we realized in this, and this is a very simplified example, but like if we take like a generic funnel, like, oh, people dropped off at this point in the user experience, it's like, okay, well, why? And so then you can then generate a series of hypotheses. You can go back to customers, you can talk with them and kind of develop an understanding and enhance that feature down the road.
Okay. And so you thought, okay, you want to, uh, have maybe larger scope, right? And then have
Yep.
work in cross-functional teams. And so and how, like for you, it was clear that you need to go this road. So you need to go into the product management um, role, or like how did you realize that this is actually what you need? Because you already had experience working with product managers, right?
Yeah. So it's actually interesting. A few companies back, I was really pushing the product team to like conduct experiments. And I was like, experiments are super easy. Like I earned that experience when I was at a B2C company. We had a rigorous like growth strategy. And so like that's where I like entered into like, ooh, what's A/B testing? Ooh, what's like how can we effectively use data to drive our business decisions? And so a few companies ago, I was like really pressuring the product team, like, hey, like maybe we can test this hypothesis out as an experiment. Like, what kind of data do we have at our disposal? Like, how can we measure this? And I remember the VP of product at the time, she approached me and she's like, I've never heard a designer advocating for data, like ever. She's like, I would be interested in talking more. I think you would be a great PM. Like, we should talk about it. I didn't make the transition back then, but it ended up working out. I ended up making the transition further down the road. But so yeah, that's kind of like what kind of led me into it.
And why data PM specifically, or it just happened?
I mean, there is a reason. Throughout my career in product, I spent a lot of time talking to various people in different fields, industries, roles from different backgrounds. And I often ask the question, like, how do you go about making decisions? And every answer is a little bit different, but one thing that they all have in common is data, every single one. The problem I've found is that, most people who work outside of data teams, they generally don't have access to know-how or the know-how to leverage that data. Oftentimes they're struggling to meet their objectives while not having effective ways to measure the success of their projects. And so, that then leads to a multitude of problems down the road. Either they're working on the wrong thing or, maybe they're under delivering on something that they should be focusing on a little bit more. So I wanted to learn a lot more around how data teams operate and how they can take oftentimes abstract requirements from all over the business, synthesize that data and make it actionable. Like, to me, that was super interesting. Especially like the last company I worked for was an HR data platform. A lot of HR professionals are working with massive amounts of, PII. And so like understanding the compliance implications around that, like how do you store that data? How do you make sure that, it's secure? How do you make sure that the data that you're receiving in your HRIS tool is correct? Because a lot of times there's a lot of various different sources of data that are coming in, and you have to rely on, humans as part of that data entry. And so like, how do you make sure that the data that you're receiving, that you're using to interface with your employees is correct? So that was kind of like led me into my interest in data.
Maybe it's a gross oversimplification, but from what I understood, a data product manager is a product manager working with data teams or like being inside a data team, right?
Yes.
This is correct, right?
Yes.
Are there any other differences between like let's say a more traditional product manager and data product manager, apart from things that you mentioned that you need to know what PII stands for and think about data quality and other things?
I'm relatively like early in my career, so I'm still figuring that out. I also feel like there are a couple different interpretations that I've read about as to what a data PM is. I've heard some people say like it's part, data analysis, like you are also an analyst as part of your role. I've heard that sometimes you're oftentimes a data scientist as well. So to answer that question, like, I'm not sure how to answer it, honestly. I'm still in the initial phase of like learning how to be a data PM.
You said you need to be a bit of a data analyst. So do you need to know things like SQL and to being able to go fetch the data you need and I don't know, build some dashboards, or you still rely on somebody else to do that?
I guess it really depends on the makeup of your team, but I would say that it would be a pretty hard requirement. Like, you need to know how to get the data and to like check the work and make sure that, whatever output you're getting is, what you expected. So I did quite a bit of, learning. I learned SQL. I learned, I took a few courses in data engineering. Like, I took some data camp courses to kind of like understand like some of the fundamentals. So I think all of that is super important to develop, an understanding and build some context around the tools that you're building.
So SQL and then also a bit of coding, I guess. Like if you said you were taking some courses about data engineering, so you also for that probably need to know like some Python or something else, right?
I have not learned Python yet.
But so you were just watching these courses to understand what are the problems that data engineers have to deal with, right? I see. And that's interesting. But SQL would be something that you use quite often, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I use it quite a bit.
And we have a question from Virginia. What skills should you have to become a data product manager? So you mentioned one of them is SQL. What are the other skills? I guess maybe the skills of usual PM as well? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that you should have an insatiable hunger to understand how data works, and you're interested in solving data problems for your customers, not just, the data engineers themselves that, are building the tools, but also those who are most impacted by that data. So people like consumers within the business, internal or external, who might be making decisions. But you're also addicted to the idea of like innovating and taking data further. And what I mean by that is like when I entered this role, like I had a very, I would say, rudimentary understanding of data. But one of the things that, the founders of my company said is like, that's actually a good thing. Like we need a fresh perspective on like, we want you to go through the pain, go through like listening and hearing about like stories of what data engineering teams are going through, what data professionals are going through, come in with a fresh eye, go through the experience, use your UX background to kind of like pull apart all the things that, are working and aren't working. So I would say like, I don't necessarily think you need to have a background in data. You just need to have like an interest and a curiosity in it.
And you
Technical
mentioned
background.
City.
Technical background does help. I mean, a lot of what I do is read documentation, which is sad to say, very painful to read through, specifically around, data tooling. It's really hard.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned that you need to have some, did you say have hunger for understanding how data works? I think that you said something like this. So how can you develop understanding of that? How can you understand how data works? Like in what sense how data works? Like how it is, produced and, processed and consumed?
I mean, I think it starts from, just understanding where it comes from to start. Understanding how a culmination of all the working parts. So like, I feel like the interesting about data is that it's not just one piece of data that informs, an answer to a question. It's usually a combination of various points of data that can ultimately answer a question well. And so I would say that having like an interest in understanding what that actually means is like where you begin this journey. And from there, you can go into the process of like understanding like how that data is, pulled from various different sources, how it's prepared through transformation, and then prepared for, either a data warehouse where an analyst can take that and run with it, or maybe a data lake where you're logging or whatever. Or maybe it's being directly plugged into a data application. And so like going through that journey of understanding how it's used, not just in the data. I feel like everyone just thinks that data is used for data analysis, but there's so many other applications and use cases. Like starting to dig in on, all the different ways that data can be leveraged as part of a business. So that it really is the underlying layer of every company.
Okay. So basically understanding that is, and being curious how it's actually used, how it's produced is, you say it's quite important, right, for this role. Okay. Yep. And yeah, I'm quite interested. Let's say if we go back, like when did you make the switch? Maybe 1 year ago. Like 1 year ago, I guess you became interested in this topic, right? Or I don't know. Let's say let's go back in time when you became interested and you realized this is what I want to do, and what you did. What did you do after that? So what were the steps you took to actually end up in this role?
So I guess I should start that like I kind of made my point of entry as a product designer. So I wanted to, design and develop tooling around data, so I could better understand it. And part of that journey was really like getting into the motion of developing, data tools, designing and developing data tools, and learning from a lot of the engineering teams that I was collaborating with. It kind of happened, and I feel like this kind of happens a lot in my life, so I don't know if this is directly applicable to other people's, experiences, but like I happen to be oddly connected with a lot of people in the data space. And I don't know if it's because of like the types of companies that I've worked for, but really just like having conversations with them, talking about, some of the problems that, at the time, like HR professionals or companies that were hiring and leveraging background check data for, like how they were making decisions and like, how does this work? And like, how do you do your job? And like, blah, blah, blah. And just like kind of getting into, some of the more tactical aspects of their work, which like, I mean, I think at the time I had like a very granular understanding. And from there, like, it really was just about, networking with various like people. How I got into this specific company where I'm actually, designing and developing, data tools directly, like Roxa. I actually had worked with the CEO at a prior company. We actually worked on data tools at Zendesk, not data tools, developer tools at Zendesk. So he and I had already had like a familiarity working with one another, and he's like, hey, like I'm working on this new application. There's going to be a marketplace, all these things. He's like, let's do this. So it kind of just happened. Like I didn't really have a process of steps that I took. So, I mean, I wish I did, but I mean, really it was just about putting myself out there, having conversations, talking with people and showing that interest, which kind of led to me making the transition.
Okay, so mostly networking. I'm also curious about did you take any specific courses that help you, or you were taking courses after you actually made the transition? Because you mentioned you took some courses, like you trained yourself, like you learned SQL, then you also took data engineering course. Were you doing this before actually becoming data product manager, or after?
No, it was actually after. And if I could have done one thing differently about this transition, I would have done this much sooner.
Okay, that's
Much sooner.
so basically you first became a data product manager and then learned all the things. So you didn't study specifically for this role to become a data product manager.
I did
Oh,
not.
that's amazing. But let's say if somebody wants to do this right now, of course they can, like, how do you say it, fake it till you make it, right? But like, let's say if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want to become a data product manager, I am now a product designer, what kind of things would you recommend me to learn now to be able to make this transition?
I think I always start by asking the question like, well, why a data product manager? I want to understand like some of the motivations as to why they want to do that from product design. A lot of that can help inform like, okay, what is their decision making here? If they're already like inclined to data, then it's just kind of like, yeah, you should make the jump. Here are some things that I think you can do. So like building case studies around like data projects that they've worked on. Going through the process of, actually working, designing, developing, solutioning around a data product would be immensely helpful. And from there, like whether or not, they were working with a product manager or maybe they were flying solo, who knows, depends on the makeup of the team. Like if they can build, case studies around, the products that they've built, like I think that could go a long way in demonstrating their ability. And that's something that they can take with them when they, either make a transition in their career within a company, or even if they decide I'm gonna go for it and I'm going to start applying for, potential positions in product management. I would say that like a lot of my friends in general product management have said I'm crazy for jumping straight into not only like data, but like also transiting to product management at the same time. Like it's hard. It's challenging. I feel like I'm learning a lot of things all at once. And I've fortunately had the, privilege to have a lot of great people in my network that have helped me develop an understanding and get there. So yeah, really leveraging the people in your network that are, already in the space to kind of understand like, okay, I'm curious what you think about my case study. Like, can we talk about this? Like, tell me more about like maybe the things that I'm not understanding about what I've worked on. Learning some of like the fundamental skills like around SQL. If you want to learn Python, you can build data apps if you want to. I feel like there's pretty simple ways of, showing that ability through like using public data sets, that are available broadly out there. You can, build case studies off of those. You don't have to necessarily use like existing work either. So if you want to, build an application, that surfaces COVID-19 data and like you can build something around that, like I think that could go a long way in helping you, move into the direction of data product management.
And what's a case study? So you said you should have case studies around data projects. So how does a case study look like?
So a case study really goes into like the problem that you're trying to solve. So usually there's like a central problem, like we're trying to make COVID-19 data more accessible to, people in this demographic. And so then you can go through the process of like all the research that you went through, like the data that you have, and kind of like it's very similar to what a product manager does when they build the one pager to kind of explain the why behind what they're doing. You can then go into the process of like, and here are some ways, here's some opportunities I identified, here are some prototypes. I did the user test. It's basically going full end-to-end process of like developing a data product. So not only just, saying like, and here was a solution, you can also go back and say like, and I went back to customers or I went back to, people and asked them like, hey, like, what do you think could have been better? Like, did you use the tool? Asking questions to understand like the utility of it and whether or not it actually achieved the outcomes you were expecting. And usually there's like a conclusion on like, this was a very successful product, or maybe this wasn't as successful as I thought. And here are ways that I would, potentially improve on this feature or this product.
Interesting. So basically, if I got you correctly, so the case study should contain a problem, then describe the research you did, the outcome of this research, the identified opportunities, then the solution that you came with after doing this research. Then you probably do a few iterations on that, and then there is a final outcome, and some conclusion like was it successful project or not. Right? And how would you put this like as a document, like with a couple of pages, right?
There's a
Like
couple different formats you can go with. I've seen some people just like put it on their personal websites. That's like the
a
best
blog
way
post,
to,
right?
yeah, like a blog post. Some people actually do use like Medium as a way to kind of like present case studies. Personal websites, if you're directly applying and you're like sharing with a specific group of people, you can use a PDF. Like I've seen case studies packaged in a number of different ways.
Like slide
It really
decks.
just depends on, yeah, slide decks work too. It really depends on who your audience is. Like I find that I love when I go to someone's website and I see, a list of case studies that they've worked on, and I'm like, ooh, cool, what have they been working on? And I think that's a great way to get discovered as opposed to like having to go through the process of specifically applying and sending out your case studies to individuals. Like put it somewhere public where people can find it, and that can generate a multitude of opportunities for you.
Okay, so you mentioned multiple times that networking is like a big deal, right? Because of your network, you managed to get a lot of opportunities, right? And including this one, the job you have right now, because it was your former colleague, right, from some of your previous jobs. Then it's important also to be, how to say, discoverable, so people can discover you through blog posts and other things. And this is how like you prepare these case studies, so you put them out there and people can find you through these case studies. And Also, you said, well, we talked about these different phases of a project or product, right? So this is something as a you should also know as a data product manager, right? So this is, I guess, some product management skills that you need, right, for this job. Do you know any good resource for where you can pick up the skills?
Or product management?
Yeah, for product management.
I feel like there's a ton of different, I guess, courses out there. I can send a list that I've collected over the years to you, and you can include that. I haven't gone through a specific boot camp. Most of my learning has been on the job, so I can't recommend one through direct experience. One program, actually, no, that's incorrect. I went through the Reforge Product Management Fundamentals course, which is great. They kind of go through all the various stages of, product development for a product manager. You get to talk with and interact with a bunch of, product leaders in various different, industries to learn more about their experiences. And a lot of those are directly applicable to the work that you'll be doing. There's also a range of various exercises that you also do. It's quite a commitment, but I think if you want to get a solid, how do you say it? If you want to get your feet wet and, dive into all of the motions of product management. The thing with product management is it's not just one set linear process to everything. It really depends on the products that you're working on, the team structure, etc. So understanding and having the foundations and knowing what you can add to your tool set as a product manager is super powerful. So taking a course like the one at Reforge is really good. So you can kind of build that tool set, ask questions, understand the context behind it by talking to industry leaders, and then know when it's directly applicable to the work that you're doing. So then, you can make the best decisions for your team.
Yeah, thanks. So I was thinking something like a course plan or study plan for somebody who wants to transition to this role. So first of all, you should take some sort of general product management course, or pick up this skill somewhere, maybe through not necessarily through courses, but somehow pick this. Then you mentioned SQL and other data related things, right? And then you should also prepare your portfolio, make a couple of case studies, put them on Medium, and yeah, that should be sufficient, right? Or there's something else that I'm missing. And network, of course, right?
Yeah, I would say really put yourself out there and talk with product managers that work in the space extensively. That's one thing that I also would have done a bit differently. It's just hard to find data product managers. They're relatively rare, and understanding I'm obviously learning from my VP of product has been working in data for a decade. He used to be a data engineer and is now a product leader in data. And so a lot of my learning also comes from him, as well as he coaches me and guides me through that process. I think one other thing that would be super useful for individuals who want to become data product manager or product managers in general is to find someone who can mentor you or guide you through this learning process. I would say finding data product managers, while it is relatively hard to find them, you can find them if you look at look at all the data companies out there and see who is working in product at those companies, and you can generally find someone. But definitely find a mentor that can kind of help guide you through that process as well.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we have quite a few questions, and I wanted to start with a question from Janine. The question is, what's the most challenging aspect or task that you've encountered in your role as a data product manager?
For me, it's really been learning how to interact with the tools. I'm not an engineer, I'm a designer. I can do a little bit of coding, but like getting through the documentation of some of the data tooling out there, I think I'd mentioned it earlier, it's really hard. And a lot of that comes from, at least in my experience, understanding all the dependencies and other various tooling that like comes into play, like, spin up, a service with Docker and like do all these things. And I'm just like, okay, now I need to figure out how to do this. So it's like, there's like a, lead up to, getting a specific outcome. And it's not always apparent when you're, reading up on how to use a specific tool.
Especially when these docs are written by engineers, right?
Yeah.
Then they kind of assume that people who read these docs, they have the same background, so they understand easily what they mean. But if you're like a product manager, maybe you don't necessarily have the same background as they, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that was the most challenging aspect, right?
For me, yes.
Then a question from Virginia is, how does your day-to-day look like?
Day to day, it's kind of all over the place. Obviously, we have, the first of the day stand up with the team, and that's really just to figure out what, engineering is working on, what design is working on, what product is working on. A lot of my time is spent, figuring out the why behind some of the things that we're, planning. So whether that's a new connector or maybe a new feature set around transformations, like figuring out, okay, again, what problem are we trying to solve, and going through that process that I talked about before. But there's a lot of other things that kind of happen in between as part of the day. So it's not just like doing the work of like product development, it's also working cross-functionally with other teams. So I work pretty heavily with our marketing team. So I do a lot of like quick and dirty data analysis for them so they can answer questions about our customers. So I'm directly querying our platform API database to kind of understand like, here's a list of customers that fit these attributes for you. So it's like doing a lot of that at the same time. We are also very early stage. I should mention that we're not a big company. And so like, part of my job is also fulfilling other areas. I'm also in, design reviews. Sometimes it's related to projects that I'm on. Sometimes that's not, offering design critique, customer development conversations. So like one part of our job, even if it's not directly tied to a project, is just getting out there and talking with data professionals. So reaching out, every day to either people who have signed up on our platform or, various data professionals within my internal network or external of that, getting time on the phone to talk with them and learn more about, their experiences. Also instrumenting, at least right now, I've been instrumenting product analytics tracking. So figuring out, how do we best utilize our analytics tracking tool to measure user behavior in our application. So doing a lot of like side projects like that kind of like reinforce the work that we do also. I think I covered all of it. There's a lot that goes into the day-to-day, and it's not always the same.
Are you always multitasking, or you're trying to arrange your day in a way that you don't have to switch context?
There's a lot of context switching in product management. It's kind of the name of the game. It's just like prioritizing what you do in your day-to-day. So obviously someone can come to you and say like, hey, I need an answer to this question. It's up to you to really decide, okay, well, how urgent is this? And like, what is this for? And you can kind of determine throughout your day, like when you do that work, because there's definitely work that comes up in the middle of the day that I'm like, oh, this can be kicked off till next week. Okay, let's talk next week. I'll have the answers for you then. So it's really just like prioritizing your day and understanding like what are the key things that I need to get done, especially at early stage. Like, you have to use your time wisely.
And you mentioned that you spend a lot of time talking to data professionals, getting on the phone with them, asking questions. And I'm wondering, how do this conversation look like? So what do you ask? Like, it's called cust dev, right?
Customer development,
Yes.
yeah.
So how does it look like? What do you ask?
I mean, customer development can range depending on who I'm talking to. So like, I'm not just talking to data engineers, I'm also talking to data scientists, data analysts, data analyst engineers. And a lot of what I talk about is just like understanding like what their core responsibilities are. And, depending on that answer, like sometimes I'll go into like, okay, what specific problems are you trying to solve in this area? What challenges are you running into? So really getting into some of the tactical aspects of like the tooling that they use, or maybe some of the organizational problems that they have where, it's not just the tooling, it's also, maybe the company isn't data driven, maybe they aren't given the resources that they need, and how they kind of get around that in order to do their job. And so a lot of the conversations in general are more geared towards like, it's kind of like a flowing thing. There's like no rigid, structure, but I do like to hit the points of like, what are your responsibilities? Like, where are you currently focusing your time? And kind of like digging into some of the challenges specifically to understand like what could be better in your day to day, and like how do you accomplish that today? Are you or are you not?
And if somebody wants to talk to you about that, how can they reach out to you?
You can send me a message in the Data Talks Club Slack.
Okay.
Or I can share my email address, and I'd be happy to chat with anyone.
Okay. But you said if they leave their email on your website, right, then you will find this email and contact them. Okay. What was the most interesting part? What was the most interesting, let's say, insight you got from these conversations?
I guess the most surprising thing is trying to think of how to phrase this. It was interesting to see, and maybe I wasn't too terribly surprised, but it was surprising all the same through the discussions, is that a lot of data teams spend a lot of time educating various like cross functional teams on like how to leverage data. I feel like in a lot of discussions that I've had, specifically with data engineers, they kind of operate in isolation at a lot of companies. I'm starting to see that a lot of teams are kind of like, integrating data into their product teams. But for a really long time, or like from what I've seen, like a lot of data teams are like in service of like product, and service of marketing, and service of, business intelligence. And so like a lot of what they do, there's like a lot of context switching between like, okay, now I need to like help this person understand, the data that they're asking for. And I need to make sure that, this person has this. It sounded like there was just like a lot of whack-a-mole in the role. And I guess what was interesting to me was that, just understanding largely, even though there's a lot of teams that heavily rely on data, how little, professionals in various fields truly understand it, and how much work goes into educating those different business partners on how to use it. I just found that super surprising and unsurprising at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we have quite a few questions. So one interesting one is, if you need to work with a tool, a new tool for you that you have never used before, how do you learn this tool while not letting the task to be delayed? Do you learn it yourself, or you ask for help, or how do you approach that?
Generally, I try to take a whack at it first. And a lot of that is just like a lot of documentation diving, stress testing, like all the things that I could possibly do or know how to do. If I run into a wall, we have quite a few tenured data engineers on my team. I'll usually reach out to someone and say like, hey, I'm getting stuck here. Like, can you help me? Or I don't understand why it works this way. And so I rely a lot on my engineering team to kind of help me understand. The goal here is eventually I can help myself. But for right now, like as I, lack understanding in some of these tools, it's really just asking for help from the engineering team.
And how do you usually do this? You mentioned this on the stand-up. Hey, I got stuck here. Somebody has free time. Can you help me? Something like that?
We have a help channel in our Slack. So it's just like literally a help channel and you can ask any question, like no question is a bad question. And then we just make time to pair for, however long it takes. We get through the process together and yeah, that's really ad hoc.
Yeah, okay. And, do you yourself work on creating documentation as well? Or you're more like a consumer of documentation?
I help with the framing and the positioning of like how we word things, but our currently developer advocacy and engineering work together to develop that documentation.
And another question we have is, do PMs document the product and features? And how do you do this? Yeah, let's say if somebody new joins and then they want to go through all this, product discovery things and so on, like how can they learn this? How do you document that?
Yeah, so a lot of our work is documented in product docs, so one pagers, PRDs. We also have a database of customer development notes. So we articulate like, who did we talk to? What was their role? What company do they work for? And then we kind of go into, what are all the, points that I had explained before, like the responsibilities, problems they're aiming to solve. Because our product is, real-time data, we talk a little bit about CDC and the applications within their current data stack, if applicable. And so we kind of like lean in on that a little bit. But we document everything. Everything is recorded for note-taking purposes. And then we go through the process of like cataloging that. We also use it quite frequently when so we have a product weekly update that we kind of like communicate to the team what we're working on. And so we'll often draw, that information into what we talk about on a weekly basis. Like this is what we've been hearing from customers. If you want to look more into those conversations, you can find that information here. And so we're actually pushing our team to like go into these customer development notes and kind of like build empathy. They might already be data engineers or engineers that understand the product, but like it really helps to bring them along in that process and building empathy for the tools that they're building.
Yeah, and you mentioned PRD, this product requirement document, or what is that?
Yep. Product requirement document.
Yeah, like I got this right. I was thinking what it means. I think I heard this abbreviation before. That's why yeah. Do you have a couple of more minutes?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, we have more questions, and I think maybe we can cover at least one. So a question from Bayram is, how are the steps for working with what are the steps for working with data teams, and who comes with new ideas, who brings up the requirements?
What are the steps for working with data engineering teams?
Like, where do the ideas come from? Is it are they coming from you? Are they coming from the customers? Are they coming from the engineers? Are they coming from everywhere?
Gotcha. I mean, it's a culmination of all those things. So obviously we have a company and business and product strategy that we're kind of running. So a lot of the opportunities that we go after are things that we've kind of like prioritized, like both like engineering leadership, product leadership have kind of like defined for the team. And then, someone like me who's an individual contributor, we take that, we then go through the motions of like validating whether or not, it's the problem to be solved. do all the research, and then come back to the team and say like, hey, these were my findings. Do we still think this is worth going after? So a lot of the idea generation like is coming from, leadership, engineering leadership, at least right now. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a feature idea purely comes from them, because through our research and building an understanding of problem space, that might change how we approach a feature or like whatever we, end up releasing at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. So if the engineering leadership comes up with an idea, it doesn't mean you immediately run implementing this. It first goes through the validation stage, and then like you actually ask the customers to get some feedback from them, right? So that's the process.
Exactly.
So you have, I guess, some sort of backlog with ideas, and then you try to prioritize that backlog, and then you pick the most promising ones, and then you go through this process.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. Then maybe just a quick question that is more like yes or no question. Is reports, dashboards, machine learning models that Data team provides, are they all under the responsibility of data product manager or not?
Sorry,
Yeah, so like what kind of, let's say, let me try to rephrase it. So for you, are you looking only after reports, dashboards, and so on, or also machine learning models as well? Like, do data product managers care about machine learning, data science stuff, or mostly about analytics and data engineering stuff?
I personally have not entered that stage in my career, but yes, that is the expectation.
And yes, meaning that
eventually.
also including like data science stuff, not just
Data
data
science,
analytics.
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that would be it. Do you have any last words before we wrap up?
No, I'm
No.
just very honored to be here. I mean, as someone who has just entered into this role and in this like very specific, fascinating industry, I'm just glad I could talk about my experiences with you all. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that was really great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for finding time to join us. I know for you it's a bit early. Thanks for being available and then sharing your experience with us. Thanks a lot. And
Thank you.
thanks everyone for joining us today and asking questions. We had quite a lot of questions today, so thanks for being active. And yeah, I guess that would be it. Have a great weekend, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.